application of that knowledge, may we both, the teacher and the disciple, strive together for the acquisition of knowledge and wisdom. May the knowledge and wisdom that we acquire be effective and illuminative. May there be no dissension between us. Om, peace, peace, peace. So we are extremely delighted to be able to welcome our speaker today, Dr. Christopher K. Chappell. You pronounce it Chappell? Chappell. All of you are familiar with the famous Chappell, the cricketer. So he is a well-known name in philosophy and religion. He has written several books. And today he is talking about a very interesting topic, which is yoga as foundation for religious pluralism, as found in Haribhadra Virahanka Yoga Bindu. That's a rare text. And you know, religious pluralism is a topic which is very dear to Ramakrishna movement's heart. And Sri Ramakrishna not only preached it through words, but he preached it through his practice, as we call it, the phenomenological study of religions, where you study a religion not as an outsider and evaluate it, but study it as an insider by practicing it. Many people have argued that it is almost impossible for a person to attain the acme of realization even in one religion. And how is it that Sri Ramakrishna practiced the various religions? 3 days each of them, and claimed to have attained a realization of the Supreme Being through all these paths, and declared, as famously said by our Iron Maharaj, infinite paths to infinite reality. His book is now doing the ripples in the United States, as you know, and religious pluralism really means that there is no one particular path to reach the supreme reality. Once again, most of the students of yoga and Sanskrit there, you know that ekavakyata is a very important and dear concept of all the acharyas who are traditionally commented on the Upanishads and Vedanta. Ekavakyata meaning that the scripture teaches a particular doctrine. For Shankara it should be Advaita, for Ramanuja it could be Vasishta Advaita, for Madhva it is Dvaita, and so on. So if you take Advaita as a doctrine, which is taught by Vedantic texts, the Prasthanatraya, Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita and the Brahma Sutra, then the Acharya will contend that from beginning to end all the texts speak and teach the same doctrine. Swami Vivekananda also said that based on this particular doctrine of Ekavakyata, most of the Acharyas are perhaps guilty of text torturing, and the texts we spoke about or appear to speak about doctrines other than the doctrine which they thought the scripture taught, had to be twisted and tortured to be interpreted to mean that they speak the same doctrine. So questioning the Ekavakyata was a very difficult thing. Now, Sri Ramakrishna's realization of the religious pluralism, whether it is a crusade against the Ekavakyata doctrine, is also a question which is being raised and debated. Swami Tapasyananda of revered memory, who mentored me for several years, used to say that how can you say the scripture teaches only a particular doctrine? Even the poetry of some of the great minds like Shakespeare and Kalidasa perhaps could be interpreted to mean several things. Even the poet perhaps does not know, or expert in Sahitya sitting there at the end, Dr. Venkatamana Bhatt, he knows that the poets often did not quite understand their own works. They claimed it. There's a famous statement by Rabindranath Tagore, the last verse in the Gitanjali, in English translation, in which he says, people come and ask me, how do you write these things? I said, I don't know. Then, oh Lord, you keep there smiling. Then they come and ask me, tell me all your meanings. I said, I don't know what they mean. They go away in utter scorn, and oh Lord, you sit there smiling. Which means a great mind simply pours out the realization, the depths of his being, and as Vivekananda said, Vedas were not composed by the rishis, music poured from their hearts. This is a statement which he made. In that pouring out, they don't care for a particular doctrine which has to be kept up, and the so-called occupation with the logical consistency, which was called by Voltaire perhaps as a hobgoblin of little minds, doesn't bother them at all. Swami Vivekananda once taught a doctrine, and his disciple said, oh Swami, you said just the other thing yesterday. Oh, that was yesterday. That means a mind which is illumined quickly moves from one position to another in trying to look at reality and interpret it in a lightning speed, and the onlooker sticks on to what has been taught in a particular way. This requires an extraordinary mind, and the religious pluralism requires an extraordinary perception of the reality, and human minds are constituted in innumerable different ways. Swami Vivekananda once very famously said, I want the number of religions and sects to multiply. There should be as many religions and sects as there are human beings, so that every human mind will have a chance to intuit the ultimate reality. So it's a very interesting topic we have today, and this particular text, which is little known, he will talk about yoga as the foundation of religious pluralism. All of you know what yoga means. By knowing what yoga means, we do not really know what it means. Yoga is a word which is interpreted in innumerable ways. So I'm looking forward to a very interesting talk today. And this university, as you know, has been conceptualized and envisioned by Swami Vivekananda himself. At the last day of his life on the mortal earth, 4th of July 1902, while discussing with Swami Premananda, his very dear brother disciple, he said, keeping the ancient Indian spiritual wisdom intact and blending it harmoniously with Western science, we should establish a university. So we are very happy that in the Department of Sanskrit and Philosophy, where we have a course which is devoted to Sanskrit, taught in Sanskrit, which is, of course, we are very interesting. It's a statement. Of course, Sanskrit will be taught in Sanskrit. Suppose you say English is being taught in English. English can't be said in Spanish. But unfortunately, Sanskrit is a language which people think can't be so easily spoken and taught. So we are trying to have a group of students who will be able to cultivate the knowledge of Sanskrit, the literature, the language, as well as the philosophy, grammar, in the medium of Sanskrit. We have a 5-year integrated postgraduate program wherein the students study as Antevasis in a Gurukula to get a degree which is MA in Sanskrit. They go on further to go for Masters in Philosophy and PhD, Doctor of Philosophy in Sanskrit, and many of them are exposed to these ideas of yoga and Vedanta. And we also have students here who are students in the MA postgraduate course in yoga, which is a 4-semester, 2-year course. And we have, of course, our brahmacharis and the sannyasis, who he belongs to the faculty of physics. But even then, having become monks, all of us a deep interest in Vedanta and yoga, although we know very little of them. So we are looking forward to a very interesting talk. I now request our Ayan Maharaj, who heads the Department of Philosophy, to say a few words about the speaker himself and introduce the topic. Thank you so much. So welcome to you and your wife to this university. I think you have come here before. No. This is the first time your face appears familiar, from the photograph perhaps.
No, in States.
Yeah, States, yeah. So, welcome, Sagatam, Suswagatam.
I don't have much to say after Swami Atmapriyanandaji's wonderful introduction. I'll just mention some of the highlights from Professor Chappell's very distinguished academic career. He is the Doshi Professor of Indic and Comparative Theology and founding director of the Master of Arts in Yoga Studies at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, California, in the United States. He earned his BA at Stony Brook University in New York and the MA and PhD at Fordham University, also in New York. He joined the faculty of LMU in 1985. He has published more than 20 books, including the following single author studies, all published by State University of New York Press. Karma and Creativity, published in 1986. Non-Violence to Animals, Earth and Self in Asian Traditions, published in 1993. Reconciling Yogas, Haribhadra's Array of Views on Yoga with a new translation of the Yoga Drishti Samuchaya, published in 2003. Yoga and the Luminous, which you have a copy of that, right? You want to just flash that for a second? Yoga and the Luminous, Patanjali's Spiritual Path to Freedom, published in 2008. Living Landscapes, Meditation on the Elements in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain Yogas. Published, it's going to be published in 2020, just coming up. He has published many edited volumes as well on multiple topics like religion and ecology, including the volume Jainism and Ecology, published by Harvard University Press and Motilal Banarsidass. Recent publications include an edited volume on Yoga in Jainism, published by Routledge in 2016, and another book called Thinking with the Yoga Sutra, Translation and Interpretation, co-edited with Ana Funes Maderi, published by Routledge in 2019. Chris and his wife Maureen, who is sitting here, studied classical yoga with Gurani Anjali Inti, a native of Kolkata, from 1972 until her passing in 2001. So they're not just scholars, but they're also sadhakas, they're spiritual practitioners. There's this new sort of movement toward this group of scholars who are also practitioners, and I'm happy to say that he's part of that group, and his wife as well. They are residing in New Delhi under the auspices of a Fulbright Nehru Fellowship until December 15, 2019. Please join me in welcoming Professor Christopher Chappell.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be invited. As you heard, our spiritual teacher grew up here in Calcutta, and since moving to Los Angeles in 1985, we have enjoyed a very close relationship with the Hollywood Center, as well as with the convent. Some of you probably know Saradesha Prana and Swami Sarvadevananda, Swami Sahananda, and so on. So they are all part of the friendship that we have been blessed with in Los Angeles. And before I talk philosophically about religious pluralism, I wanted to take you on a quick tour of my own home city, which is a much newer city than the city of Calcutta. And this is what it looks like today. And as you can see, we have a smoke problem, a smog problem. And the Hollywood Center is right over here. So your Vedanta friends are well in place. And Vedanta has been part of our landscape since just shortly after the transition from indigenous cultures, the indigenous people of Los Angeles who have lived there for 1 1,000 years, they moved from the state of Wyoming, are called the Tongva, and this was the way of life as recently as 160 years ago. Our university is now located on that bluff. This is the county of Los Angeles in yellow, which is the place of these indigenous Tongva people. In 1890, there were only 100,000 people in this entire area. Now there are 10 million. So we've had tremendous growth in the period of 1 century. And when the people came up from Mexico to establish this as a city, much like the people that came over from England even before this to establish Kolkata, there was this idea that somehow European culture was superior. And if you look at this date, this is not very old for Calcutta, but this is very old for Los Angeles. And less than 200 years later, or some 200 years later, Swami Vivekananda, as part of his world tour following the Parliament of World Religions, came to Southern California, lived in Pasadena, California, just outside Los Angeles, and he wrote the very famous book, Raja Yoga, while living in California. We've so enjoyed the photographs of Swamiji in various offices and locations here, and I thought you would very much enjoy seeing this photograph. Other religious movements came shortly thereafter to Los Angeles. This is a very important movement for Christian spirituality that gave birth to the Assemblies of God and the Church of God in Christ. Long, complicated intercultural tradition arising from the insight and inspiration of an African American former slave. We also have a long Jewish tradition going back also to the 1860s, a magnificent congregation known as the Wilshire Boulevard Temple. The Greek Orthodox, also long time in the city of Los Angeles, building this magnificent cathedral in 1952. The Catholics built a new cathedral in the year 2002. And of course, going back to the yoga roots in America, Paramahansa Yogananda came to Los Angeles in 1920. In this particular part of the Self-Realization Fellowship Shrine, you will find an urn that contains, a sarcophagus in fact, that contains ashes of Mahatma Gandhi. And you can see that inspired, of course, by the language of Swami Vivekananda, his first organization was called the Church of All Religions. This still exists in Hollywood, and as you can see, he spent his true formative adult years within the city of Los Angeles. We also have sad moments. During World War II, over 100,000 people of Japanese ancestry were put into concentration camps, locked up for 4 years. And when they returned, they had to think about the prejudice that was directed toward them. And they reshaped the religion and to the form very close to a Christian church. And they renamed their organization the Buddhist Churches of America. So much as Paramahansa Yogananda had come up with a church of all religions to communicate Vedanta, so also the Buddhists developed a worship style not unlike Paramahansa Yogananda, not unlike even the Hollywood Vedanta Center, which has pews and hymnals, so that it imitates Christian styles of worship. By 1965, with civil rights legislation inspired directly by the work of Mahatma Gandhi, the attitude toward the foreigner changed. And rather than seeing people as utterly different, in 1965, a 45-year legacy of exclusivist immigration policies was reversed. And after 1965, Dr. Ayon Maharaj's parents were able to come to America, and now we have about 5 million people of Indian descent in America, an equal number of people of Chinese descent, many millions of people of African descent, many tens of millions of people of Latin American descent, and all of this made possible due to the hard work of Reverend James Lawson, who had lived here in India in the 1950s. He lived at Sevagram Ashram. He learned the Gandhian technique of nonviolent direct action, and as a result, laws changed, and America came to embrace pluralism. When the Thai came, and again, the second largest Thai city after Bangkok is Los Angeles, they came to embrace their culture fully in every way. And to visit the Wat Thai is identical to visiting a Buddhist temple in Thailand. Does not feel at all like a church. Shalai Temple, the largest Buddhist complex in the Western Hemisphere, also in Los Angeles County, utterly as if you were walking into China. The worship space here, only floor sitting, 10,000 Buddhas in 10,000 niches, a remarkable feat of architecture. Muslims in small numbers since the founding of America, and after 1965 arriving from all nations of the world. The oldest center, 1952, many Lebanese immigrants brought with them Islam, as well as the African American, the slave community. Many of those people came as Muslims. And I like this center in particular. I bring my students here, and the Muslims are from the African American community, from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, from India, from Saudi Arabia, from literally all over the Islamic world, from Indonesia, of course, very prominently, Egypt. And then the Sikhs, again, after 1965, this is a Gurdwara identical to any Gurdwara you would see in India, both outside and inside. There are now dozens of mosques in Los Angeles, probably a dozen Gurdwaras in Los Angeles County. And then ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. This was built with money donated by George Harrison, a member of the Beatles, who lived here in Los Angeles at this very center. The Bhagavad Gita, as it is, was distributed from this center. The Bhaktivedanta Publishing House is located just a few blocks from our university. And again, if you walk into this building, it's as if you're at the Jagannath Temple, replete with deities identical to the deities that you would see in India. And the pujaris are very hard-working pujaris who spend all day maintaining these shrines, making the offerings, changing the clothes of the deity, making certain that all of the kirtan is done at the appropriate time. They also have their own form of langar, and every Sunday afternoon they feed hundreds of people, including people who are homeless and without resource. Up in Malibu, when the physicians came from India, they, of course, chose the best place to build their temple. And those of you who are familiar with South Asia, rather South India, this is modeled with the same design as you see in the Tamil South Indian temple landscape, including Meenakshi Temple. And this is a beautiful, beautiful place in a very, very fancy Malibu neighborhood. And the other thing that happened with this change in immigration is that now for nearly 50 years, the wealthiest group, the wealthiest community in the United States, wealthier than any white people, wealthier than the Jewish community, the wealthiest, most accomplished, most highly educated ethnic community within America is Indian American. We also have Kabir. And not all of the Indians that came from highly educated stock, many of them small shopkeepers and motel owners, many of them from rural Gujarat in particular. And there is an entire community, pre-Guru Nanak, devoted from the state of Gujarat to the beautiful, insightful, iconoclastic poetry of Kabir. And we have a temple in his honor, not too far from our home. And then the Jain Center of Southern California. In 1979, when it was first conceptualized, the city of Buena Park, where it's located, said it must look like a Spanish mission. So they said, okay. And then eventually they have brought so much economic wealth to this particular neighborhood that they applied to rebuild, and by this time they'd grown from a very small facility to a full city block, and this is done 100% in the style of traditional Jain architecture with remarkable carved sandstone imported from India and inlaid marble floors with precious gems in the floor. It's a spectacular place to visit. So I wanted to give you a sense visually of pluralism in my own home city. And I also wanted, in addition to reminding you through the Ishkan slide of the many people, not unlike my wife and myself, who have dedicated our lives to really the practice of meditation and the promulgation of meditation and yoga, that there are various organizations that are doing this work. Inside LA, this is one of their many meditation centers, has about 10,000 people as part of their network doing a form of Vipassana learned by the founder from a tradition that comes from Thailand, a tradition familiar, a cousin tradition to that taught by Mr. Goenka. And then our own work at Loyola Marymount University, mentioned earlier, is a Master of Arts in Yoga Studies. I brought brochures if you are interested, but just as we heard Swamiji talk about the importance of Sanskrit, all of our students do 3 full semesters of Sanskrit. They work with Gita, shlokas in Sanskrit. They work with the Yoga Sutra in Sanskrit. They do 3 full semesters of anatomy, physiology, the modern expressions of yoga. They have a full 5 semesters of yoga philosophy, including Buddhist approaches to meditation. Everyone comes to India. We live in Delhi, we live in Jaipur, we live in Pune together to learn about the Jain expression of yoga. And they also study, in addition to Vedanta Yoga Sankhya, they also study depth psychology, Jungian psychology, and the pragmatic work of William James philosophically. So psychology, spirituality, literature, culture, all very important and integrated into this degree program. Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh moved through the United States, city to city, visiting places that have a history of trouble and violence. And he would go into the most rugged neighborhoods and invite everyone to accompany him on a silent walk. And when we bestowed upon him our Doshi Bridge Builder Award, he brought with him 100 monks from all nationalities who chanted, who brought a sense of peace to the couple thousand that we assembled at our university, and communicated through his example and through his instruction the importance of silence in allowing people to come to a place of peace. And one of our faculty members, Eric Greenberg, in the center there, has originated a peace walk that includes rabbis, that includes imams, that includes Protestant ministers, that includes Catholic priests, that includes practitioners of the Orthodox faith, that includes people from the Vedanta Society, from the various yoga communities, from the Buddhist communities. And this topic, this idea of united we stand, I so appreciate it, and I almost said, well, he gave my talk already, I don't need to say anything. But this is not about uniting everybody in one voice. This is not about ekada or ekavakya. There is not one voice. There is not one expression. But there can only be peace and understanding through the acknowledgement of unekantvada, through the acknowledgement that there can never be one perspective that holds sway over all other perspectives. Many of you have been studying Sankhya, and in the Sankhya Karika, there is this beautiful, beautiful truth that there are many Purushas. And this, we can infer, sends a signal that everybody's perspective, whether a lowly perspective or the most liberated, astute, insightful perspective, everybody's perspective is unique to that specific individual. And that the story of what brought me to love for the life of yoga will be different from the story, although our stories are quite similar. We've been with each other we've been married for 45 years. Our stories are similar, but they're at the same time very, very different. And rather than emphasizing sameness, which is a beautiful quality, what this particular scholar, whose work you have a piece of before you, what he emphasized is the need to, yes, look for similarities, look for commonalities, and I'll share some of those with you from this text, but to always recognize the integrity and the inviolability of the importance of the individual. So I invite you to take up that sheet. and regard what's on the left. And I think everyone has it. I have, yeah. And I'm going to begin with something that is to be expressed in this new book that will be out soon. And in our own training, now a little bit was said, but when I just turned 18, and I met a woman who had just inaugurated an ashram, storefront hayloft ashram, and invited people to study classical yoga as she learned it here in Calcutta in the 1940s and the 1950s. And every week we were assigned, and this went on for year after year after year, 12 years total, and then beyond, because you get a habit and you stick with it. But every week we were assigned a different yama and a different niyama. So sometimes it would be satya and tapas. Other times it would be ahimsa and santosha. And we were to journal, we were to reflect. Every week we were told fast 1 day a week with just herb tea and fruit juice and water. And 1 day a week we were told be mauna, be silent. And we did this. And if we had to communicate, we would write something down, even at the store. It was fine. And there was this tapas that became hardwired into our daily, our weekly, our yearly rhythms. And then about 6 months into this training, we were given the Pancha Mahabhuta Dharanas. And for 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening, for an entire month, we dedicated ourselves to Prithvi, to earth, gazing upon earth. Then water, jal, up, vari, for a full month. Then fire, then air, and then space. And as I grew in awareness of other yoga traditions, and as I came to know, after I moved to Los Angeles, followers of the many disciples of Krishnamacharya, as I came to know the many followers of the Shivananda movement, including disciples of Vishnudevananda and Satchidananda, the closest I ever got to a training similar was with Saradesha Prana of the Hollywood Vedanta, the Vedanta Center in Hollywood. She said, yes, we do the Bhuta Shuddhi. And it was a quicker process, but there was a systematic acknowledgement of the Pancha Mahabhutas. And then about 20 years ago, more actually, I discovered the Yoga Vasishta includes chapters, entire chapters dedicated to this practice. And I've had a translation group for 20 years, and we spent some years working, rendering those chapters about Prithvi Dharana, Jal Dharana, Agni Dharana, Vayu Dharana, Akash Dharana into English. And then I came to the Buddhists and I said, do you do Pancha Mahabhuta? And they scratched their heads and they said, well, and then I discovered, revisited in fact, the Visuddhimagga. And the Visuddhimagga, a meditation manual from over 1,500 years ago of Buddhist practice, gives the same identical instructions. I discovered that these are described in the Gheranda Samhita, so translated that text as well. And then I went to my Jain colleagues and friends and said, where do you, and that my Jain nun friends said, oh, it was so important as we were in our novitiate, and their eyes and their faces lit up, remembering sustained attention to the earth, to water, to fire, to air, to space. And then I discovered this text listed here called the Gyanarnava, and it was copied into the Yoga Shastra, the standard Jain manual for meditation from 1,000 years ago. And again, so important. And the mantras correlate, whether you are in a Shaivite text, or a Vaishnava text, or a Jaina text, or a Bauddha text. You begin with a foundation of Lam for the earth, Vam for water, Ram for fire, Yam for air, and Hum for space. Held in common by all of these very different traditions with very different and distinct theologies. So I wanted to share that as a commonality and say that this practice, including this practice of yoga, including those virtues, the yamas, ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, parigraha, okay, the Buddhists have them, the Jainas have them, the yogis have them. And for Patanjali, it's about overcoming klishta karma. Klishta karma, avidya, asmita, raga, devesha, abhinavesha. We, as human beings, are one fine, hot mess. And we were talking a little bit earlier, but one of the great known facts of the human condition is the propensity toward envy and jealousy, to knock down anyone who rises up. And why do we do this destructive and self-destructive behavior? Because of the klishta karmas. Now for the Buddhists, they have hatred, greed, and delusion. Okay, that's at the very center of the samskara chakra, what the Tibetans call the korwa. And for the Jains, they come to articulate 8 families of karmas that are problematic, that they subdivide into 148 different prakritis. And I loved discovering this in the Jain texts and making this connection with the 64th Karika that talks about Prakriti stops her dance. And as she stops her dance, she says, I have been seen. And Purusha says, oh, I've seen that before. I'm just not interested. And rather than totalizing this as, okay, that's nirvikalpi samadhi, okay, everybody's done. No, this is about ongoing processes of epiphany, ongoing viveka khyati, that overcoming one little piece of your damaged klishta karma, sukshma sharira, and purifying it gives you courage to go on to that next challenge that will inevitably arise. So I wanted to, in a sense, typologize klishta karma as the universal difficulty regardless of tradition. In Islam, they call it, one of the names given is shirk. The idea that I could have the hubris to think that something trivial within my life is more important than God. And that's a different expression. And then we look at the Christian expression, the 7 cardinal sins, a delineation of that same troublesome, what's called klishta karma in yoga traditions, and in Judaism, trying to follow the 10 commandments, trying to follow all of the laws of Leviticus. Where do we find ourselves? We find ourselves in a place of struggle. We find ourselves in a place of difficulty. And just as Sri Ramakrishna had taken up, as was so beautifully stated, the challenge put forth by so many different faiths, so also we find ourselves inspired by the language of yoga that suggests, in a sense, a sisterhood and a brotherhood of the task of being the best human being possible. Now, one of the favorite texts of particularly Sri Ramakrishna was the Yoga Vasishta. And this was a favorite also of Swami Shivananda. And it, in fact, was the topic of my PhD dissertation. And in the Yoga Vasishta, we get a very beautiful expression of Vedanta that has a sevenfold yoga. And that yoga begins with nivritti, begins with pulling back from all of the influences, which means identifying the problems with the influences of the klishta karmas. That my greed does not serve me well. My jealousy does not serve me well. My ignorance certainly does not serve me well. So beginning to fall back away from that and becoming deeply reflective. Bringing up a practice called vicharana that then allows one to move into a place of a samsanga. Now, I'd like you all to take your left hand and turn it into the three gunas. And I know this audience, you know the three gunas. And you can name your thumb one of them. You can name your middle and ring finger one of them. You can name, rather, your ring finger. But sattva, rajas, tamas doesn't matter. But just look at it. That's usually what we're doing, is we're just sort of running around with these. Then take your right hand and put it over. Put it right up close to it, please. And then slowly pull that hand back, and this becomes the drashta. This is the witness. And then finally you can see, oh, this is doing this, but this is truly who I am. Okay? Don't really, it's all happening out here. And with that, rising into a place of non-attachment comes, and I love this because it's Vedantic, but it's also profoundly psychological and really the hallmark of the Yoga Vasishta. The dream world is primary. The waking world, it's here. But we're driven by our dreams. Many of you, most likely, have had a very auspicious dream. Perhaps you even dreamt of this place before you ever arrived. And in this Yoga Vasishta yoga, you begin to see that this thing agreed upon as the waking state is really not as lasting or as reliable as being in touch with this other dream and sleep reality. And with this, one is able to move about as if you are sort of in deep sleep. The Turiya, that fourth state, remember, waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and then number 4. We can't, as Swamiji said, we can't talk about it. We don't know what this yoga thing is. That becomes primary, and then you're able to live. And what does it mean to be in a state of Jivan Mukta? It means to be utterly, at all times, in service of others. And having attained that, having lived that, when the final stage of yoga comes, there's a lifting free from the body. And according to the Jains, you ascend to the Siddhaloka. Patanjali gives a big hint about you might go up there with the other Ishvaras. Okay, he's much less specific than some others. But the idea is, as our own teacher would say, if you're not at peace at the time of death, then you will die a deathless death. Your samskaras, your klishta karmas will bundle themselves over into a new embodiment, and you'll go through the expectations and the lessons offered by life again and again and again. And this yoga narrative can give us each great inspiration to imagine what can be in a world governed by ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparigraha, and to hope that this sukshma sharira can go to a place of shukla sharira, of a body that is suffused with a goodness that will work for the sake of loka sangraha, of holding the world together as Krishna sets forth in the Bhagavad Gita. Now I'm going to share a few verses from the Yoga Bindu, and I'm going to tell you a little story about this little-known figure. And he's a composite figure. The Jains have had lots of ups and downs throughout history. They've lost their original scripture. And their libraries, although they remain some of the best libraries, are a little bit inconsistent. And as you know, the most a library can last in India is 1,000 years before the books completely fall apart. But Haribhadra is said to have been a very, very learned Brahmin. And his initiation thread, because of his amazing accomplishments as a scholar, was a thread made of solid gold. And he was very boastful. And he said, I know all of the Vedas, I know all of the rules of logic, I know how to do all of the ceremonies, I know how to explain all of the ceremonies, I know all the philosophy of the Brahma Sutra, the Yoga Sutra, the Nyaya Sutra, I know it all. If anybody can teach me something I don't know, I will become that person's disciple. And he heard a woman, a nun, by the side of the road reciting the Tavarta Sutra of Jainism, composed probably 100 years earlier by a scholar called Umasvati. And he said, wow. And my wife and I just witnessed the end of Paryusham. And on their culminating day, it's a 10-day ceremony in the Digambara denomination, and they devote one day to the recitation of each of the 10 chapters of this text. And it outlines cosmology, it outlines ethics, it outlines the stages of yoga, ascending to the state of the Siddhaloka. And he said, wow, I like this. And he took up this course of study. He gave up his Brahmin identity and became a Jain sannyasin, became known as a great scholar as well as an accomplished monk. And he began to compare his birth tradition with Jainism. He also studied through proxy his nephews. He said, I want to know more about Buddhism. Go to Nalanda. And he sent his nephews off to Nalanda, and they were, in a sense, spies. And they learned the Niswabhava doctrine. They learned the Shunyata doctrine. And just as they had completed several years of study, they were found out by the rector of Nalanda, and they were required to take the swastika revered by the Jains and to stamp on it. And they said, we can't do that. And the Jain swastika, which is code for the whole Tattvartha Sutra cosmology, if you're at this dot, as the wheel turns, you go up into the Siddhaloka, if you're a human. If you're a god, as the wheel turns, you have to come back down. Gods always are doomed to return. If you're a hell being, you're going to be cast down, or a nasty person, you're going to be cast all the way down into hell. And then the Jains, as you know, with their love of ahimsa, if you're an animal, of course, you're eventually going to earn birth as a human. So this is so revered, so universal in the Jain community. They said, no, we can't step on it. So the monks got really mad, and it's a story of conflict, a story not unknown in India, but one group of monks grabbed one of the nephews and killed him, and the other one was really good at running, and he got all the way back to his uncle and said, this is what I learned, but my brother is dead. So, out of remorse, what Haribhadra said, I had been so insistent when I was a Brahmin that sacrifice and love of Advaita was the only true path. And then I became a Jain. And I became so insistent that the Jain path of ahimsa, the broom and my mupati, that was the only way. And actually, I only sent my nephews to learn Buddhism so that I could refute it. And then it is said that he felt great remorse because his nephew had lost his life, and that he saw the folly of his own pride. And he spent the rest of his life writing 1,440 texts, showing the benefits within each system and how the cohesion within each system must be respected. And our colleague Parimal Patel teaches his Saddarsha Samuchaya, which is a short text that gives the summary of Buddhism, and it works, gives the summary of Sankhya, and it works, gives the summary of Vedanta, and it works, gives the summary of yoga, and it works, gives the summary of Buddhism, and it works. He uses that as a primer for how Sanskrit can be put in service of knowledge of all that can be known without privileging one above the other. So in this text called the Yoga Bindu, which is 527 shlokas, I've been through it several times, chanting it in Sanskrit. I'm 41% through transforming it into English expression. But it begins by saying, what do we hold in common? So I invite you to take a look at the bottom of the sheet, and it says, having bowed to the celebrated, auspicious, eternally liberated Lord of Yogis, I will proclaim the Yoga Bindu, which I put forth to demonstrate truth. Each impartial, knowledgeable person who is established in the way of authenticity knows the harmonious nature of truth among all yoga texts. Because the purpose of yoga is liberation from klishta karma, there can be no splintering. Since there is no difference in the final goal, there is no true difference between types of yoga. Due to its goal of liberation, yoga is followed with effort by intelligent ones. This true, pure system, beneficial to one's being, should be sought with great longing. To the extent that a system results in joining one to one's true nature, whether Buddha nature or Atman, such a yoga connects one with the most eminent of intentions. Due to the linking of the self with other, karma, one remains trapped in samsara. Through disconnection, viyoga, from that karma, one is indeed liberated. And then I give here, and I'll just summarize, 2 examples of many provided in this text in varying sections of the text. And one of them is the practice of puja. And I so love, this is puja, okay? And what it says here, verse 116, after dispatching the bodies of the dead in the highest manner, and as we were driving up GT Road, there was, as usually happens sometime during my many visits to India, there was a palanquin with a body. He had his glasses on, and he looked really freshly gone, but wrapped in white cloth and draped with flowers. And he was being taken down to the Ghats, I'm sure. But it says, after dispatching the bodies of the dead in the highest manner, do not sit on their furniture. Offer their wealth to a place of pilgrimage, donation. Memorialize them with a blessed portrait. In the spirit of purity and faith, one should know how to do puja for the gods, with flowers, pushpa, with food offerings, bali, with garments, vastra, with songs, stotra, and with turmeric. So common. We do this when our loved ones, when our revered ones pass. We know that we hold this veneration, this adoration of the ancestors with us, and we hold this in common. And he goes on to say at the very last one, that all gods merit honoring, not just one preferred god. Okay? And again, this was the message of Paramahansa Sri Ramakrishna. He enacted this. He lived this. Those who have worshipped all gods control their senses and overcome fear and difficulty. Okay, how can you fear Muslims if, as had done Sri Ramakrishna, you've had an experience of that veneration, which is core to that beautiful faith? And then over to the other side, the practice of japa. Okay. Japa, prayer, taking your cogitative capacity and retraining it through prayer, through recitation, toward higher purpose, away from the klishta karmas. And it says, number 385, japa requires focusing the mind on the qualities of the desired deity, as well as its meaning and associations. Okay? And if the mantra is just a simple bija mantra, there's a universal connotation to that sound. And then it says, and if you get distracted, just stop, and once you're not distracted, take it up again. So it's a very practical set of instructions. What I want to highlight as I bring this to a close and open for questions is that this text, which seems so modern and so relevant, was written in the 6th century. So 1,400 years, we find ourselves ever more the same. And the takeaway is, for Haribhadra, that whatever it is that we do to make other, whatever it is that we do influenced by the Klishta karmas, we must take up what in yoga Patanjali calls pratipaksha bhavanam. We must take up those practices of meditation, of sustained ethical comportment that will undo those places of darkness, the places of dukkha, and allow the jyoti, that place of illumination, that place of sattva, to become in the ascension. So thank you for your attention, and carry on with your good work. Namaste.
To Professor Chappell for his wide-ranging and very interesting talk, starting with the tour of the living religious pluralism of Los Angeles, which is his hometown in California, and surveying a number of different Indian spiritual texts, and ending up with the Yoga Bindu, a very interesting text, which I think most of us probably were not aware of. So it's a very interesting syncretic text involving Jainism, but also yoga and also Vedanta and other trends. Thank you very much. And so we have some time for questions. So please make sure the questions are brief and on point. Make sure that the questions are relevant to the lecture. So any questions, please?
It appears very anachronistic and funny that the Buddhists and the Jains who practice meditation, ahimsa, should think of killing somebody just because he's spiting to me, and then spiting somebody, and then what kind of atrocities people have perpetrated in Hinduism and across the religions. What is the use of talking about this if the modern man asks? And therefore the modern youth will say the religion is responsible for all this, better you don't study anything of this. These are all only hypocrisy. So you are mentioning that the Buddhists simply took out the nephew and finished him off just because he wanted to know something of their text. So what is the use of all that meditation?
That's such a great, great enduring question. And those of you who did not catch it, he said, so much violence in the name of religion. And we just saw it in Sri Lanka. 2 decades. The Buddhists killing the Hindus. Why? Because they were other. Okay, we see it in what the British did to India, is let's pit the caste one against the other. Let's divide Bengal and we'll pit the Muslims against the Hindus. Okay? This is the Devesha that is spoken of as one of the 5 core difficulties of the human condition. In every call to nationalism in our country, Jews have been killed in greater numbers than ever in our history. Sikhs have been gunned down repeatedly for wearing turbans. Why? Because of the jingoistic language that brings humans to their lowest base capacity. And unfortunately, religion can be in service of that. It's only figures such as Jesus, and he got killed, such as Gandhi, and he got killed, such as Martin Luther King Jr., and he got killed, that we hear the minority voice, which is the voice of peace. Peace does not sell. And I remember I was working with B.K. Modi, who is, his family owns Spice Airlines, he owns Spice Malls, they have all of this fancy wealth. He became very interested in religion and decided to do a film about the life of the Buddha. He took it to the Hollywood script makers, and they created something where Buddha went off to war. And they conflated the Ashoka story with the Buddhist. It was a complete mess. Thank goodness it never got made. But what did the filmmaker say? He said, there's no interest unless there's violence. We look at the wars against the Protestants and the Catholics. We look at, you're so right. And again, people, for the sake of peace, are in the minority. And we don't make headlines, very rarely.
Vivekananda said, religions of the world have become lifeless mockeries.
Yeah, lifeless mockery. Yeah.
Any other questions? From students especially. Don't be shy.
I'm very patient.
No, you can speak in Sanskrit.
Huh? Really, no questions? Everybody's shy. I'll keep the ball rolling.
Yeah.
So, Alan Race, right, in 1983, he made this typology of 3 paradigms for making sense of the world religions. So exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism.
Yeah.
And it seems from the way that you were describing Yoga, Bindu, that you're really taking it to be a robust religious pluralism.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering whether, is that very unique within the Jaina tradition? Because I got the impression from the very superficial reading of Jainism that I've done that most of them lean toward either exclusivism or a kind of inclusivism at best. But this is striking to me that it seems very pluralistic.
Yes, those who are familiar, and just being in India, you at least have an idea of Jainism. They're renowned for being very good at banking. In fact, they floated the Mughals for centuries, and they floated the British as well. They're very good at diamonds. They're very good at marble. And they're renowned for their business acumen and their wealth. And interestingly, they have had this tremendous revival of monasticism in the last 50 years. And as wealth has increased, including throughout India, monasticism has also taken hold, and many people from non-Jain families are actually entering Jain religious orders. Once inside, yes, they are very specific in the rules to be followed. They're very specific with their vision of the path to freedom. They're very specific in their descriptions of what happens along the way and the different levels of the heavens and the fact that you can only get to the Siddhaloka from the human. So, yes, exclusive, because they all really believe that. And just as we find that people like Haribhadra have said, we, in order to survive, have to understand everybody else. When Paramahansa Yogananda established the self-realization fellowship communities in Southern California, he observed American life very carefully. And recall in 1920, immigration ended. He couldn't bring any Indians over to America. All of his followers, right up until 1965, long after he had already died, were white people accustomed to a very Protestant Christian style of worship. And if you were to go to the Self-Realization Fellowship in the United States, it's like church. It does not mean that he is not teaching Kriya Yoga, but it means that he made some adaptations. If one were to go to a Jain meditation, there's this one really remarkable teacher, and I've done day-long retreat with him, Shiv Muni, and he, for hours, has people undergo a mantra, Koham, a la Ramana Maharshi, a la Kena Upanishad, and then he switches it to Soham, a la the Upanishads, but also from Yoga Shastra. This is very much within the Shaiva mantra meditation, and it is, as you put it, syncretic. And for someone trained in yoga, it also carries with it a universality. There's a great teacher called Rakesh who has developed a big, big ashram in Gujarat. I've not visited. I've inquired, and I've had many invitations. And he, in fact, is himself a convinced Jain with a big Hindu training and background philosophically, and he's teaching Yoga Vasishta. So these boundaries and differences are such that in my own assessment and in my own life, I find it much more useful to be a pluralist, to be able to be in the friendly company of people of various faiths, so that I can feel a camaraderie, a siblinghood with my Jewish friends and family, with my Sufi friends and family, with my, the list is long. And just as India has had, as we saw with Sri Ramakrishna, all of these traditions flowing next to one another, so also in America, this is now also the case. In my job for 40 years as university professor of world religions is to give enough so that rather than being dangerous, that people can know enough history, can know enough geography, can know enough philosophy, can know enough theology to have an openness of attitude and to be able to not always perhaps celebrate, but have space for the pluralism that has always been and will always continue to be. Thank you.
One last question from anyone before we wrap it up. Yes, please.
So you mentioned in Los Angeles there are several different people of several different religious traditions who are possibly taking the idea of pluralism and coming together and so on. So clearly, especially the Indic religions and the Semitic religions, their traditions are different. They have less. Indian ones have more in common with each other than with the Semitic ones and so on to some extent. Would you say all of these traditions are the followers of all of these traditions are more or less equally susceptible to this idea of pluralism, of coming together, or is there a difference in their level of willingness, or what is your personal experience from what?
Okay, I'll tell a personal experience story. I was recruited to my university to teach all those other people. And I was the first non-Catholic on faculty to receive tenure. There had been one, but he was asked to leave. And I became the expert on the Protestants, the Muslims, the Jews, the Confucians, the Taoists, the Hindus, the Buddhists, and I had to develop courses on all of these and more. Native Americans, okay, you saw at the very beginning. And at first, some begrudged my presence within the curriculum in this Jesuit Catholic institution. And then one of my Jesuit friends, who was suspicious, came to me and he said, "One of my brothers married a Buddhist. And the practical reality is that the Catholic family, the Protestant evangelical family, the Hindu family, a lot of Hindu-Jewish intermarriage in America, okay? The beautiful wedding we went to that went on for hours and hours. It was really Indian style, but the rabbi had a lot to say, and the Ishkan-trained independent Hindu priest, who was American but really good at being Hindu, he had a lot to say, lots of fire, lots of changes of costume, and this is pretty much a reality that comes up against one's expanded family. So as in India, where the old, the generation of your grandparents would have very large families that with, advances, they lived. So 7, 9 children. By the time it came to the 5th or the 6th daughter, yeah, she's going to go into that Jain family. Or yeah, she's going to go into the Sikh family. So you end up with these webs of connection that show a common humanity. And we have a Bangladeshi society or I should say a Bengali society. We have many engineers on our faculty. Some are from West Bengal, some are from Bangladesh. What holds them in common, they get together regularly, everybody loves to gore, and everybody loves to eat. So there is this comradeship that is sort of natural, that arises out of this pluralism. And the practicality is that we are neighbors to one another. And if we're going to prevail and not have the conflict win the day, then we have to come to understand the very thoughtful philosophy, such as expressed by Sri Ramakrishna, the very thoughtful philosophy and contrition expressed by Haribhadra all of those years ago, in order for us to have a robust pluralism and still say, yeah, that's the way those people think, exclusively amongst themselves. And yeah, I remember I was at this one meeting back in the early 80s, before what we now call Hindutva was even a thing. And this someone who was loosely associated with the Vedanta Society stood up in a public community event at my university, and he said, Hinduism is the only religion that teaches that all the religions are the same, so therefore Hinduism is the best and really the only religion. And I thought, oh, there's a logic problem here. And that leads to a hegemonic way of thinking that can tilt into violence. And that's what these folks, including our dear, dear friend, where did he go? Other way? Okay, Thich Nhat Hanh. Okay, he ended the Vietnam War with his silence. In exile, he negotiated the Paris Peace Accord. And how did he do it? He did it by walking silently and refusing to condemn. Gandhi, same. The good news is that no one killed him. He's in Vietnam, dying now, a very old man, and no one killed him. So I'm going to end with a little bit of encouragement from the Dalai Lama and the Queen Mother. Okay? One of the great things about the India Museum over on Nehru Road, got this gorgeous statue of Queen Victoria. Okay, part of your legacy, and the British stuck with you guys a lot longer than they did with the Americans. But her descendant, the mother of Queen Elizabeth, lived 104 years. And she was born, I believe, in the year 1900, died in 2004. And around the turn of the century, and she was lucid, the Dalai Lama had an interview with her. And the Dalai Lama said, Queen Mother, you have seen it all. You've seen Gandhi come and go. You've seen the stock market crash worldwide. You've seen the Great Depression. You saw the First World War. You saw the Second World War. You saw the detonation of the atom bomb. You saw the Cold War come and go. Queen Mother, are things getting better or are things getting worse? And she just smiled broadly and assured the young man, to her, that no, things really are moving in a positive direction. and that we all can take, I think, courage from the tenacity and the vision of peace brought forward through the example of the Bengali Renaissance, through the example of Mahatma Gandhi, and through the enduring example of meditation and yoga becoming globalized in a way that really no one can own the yoga thing. We can't even talk about what it really is, and that's our secret weapon. Okay, so thank you all.
Let's all give a big hand for Professor Chappell. And I'm sure you're happy to know that refreshments are being served. We have tea and shingara and mishti, so enjoy.